Guys, everything you need to know about logic in less than 15 minutes.
Hey there guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about logic. So let's talk about how logic actually started and how it was actually formed when considering the greatest people and greatest minds. So the first thing is, I'm going to give you a basic order. Socrates. So Socrates was a great philosophical thinker. He's the person who actually formulated logic as basic designs. So let's go with Socrates, and then he had a student. His name was Plato. So Plato was too a great philosopher and a great teacher for his student Aristotle. So I guess these three people are the most talked about people in English literature in terms of logical thinking and design-based thinking. So what do these people actually formulate and what have they actually discussed about? So let's go and talk about that in detail as well. So we have the study of rules called syllogisms. So these are the study of rules that describe the correct way of actually combining ideas or formulating ideas or relation of ideas together. So if we have two ideas, idea 1, idea 2, so these two ideas can be combined and be formulated and actually interrelated, and then we can get a third idea called idea 3. So this process is called syllogisms. So we also have syllogisms which also deal with the truth in finding logic. These are given by truth tables. We'll talk about more about truth tables later. And we also have false values which are given by fallacies. So we're going to be discussing about these three topics in more detail in the future. So you got the basics right? Let's go and meet to the next part. So guys, we're going to be talking about arguments in the first part of the video. So what are arguments? So arguments is basically anything which provides a proof for your statement. If you state that the color of grass is green, so how can you prove that the color of grass is green? What's your argument? You can say that grass is green because the photosynthesis, which is made up for each plant, has a green colored pigment in a more logical sense. So you kind of understand what I'm talking about. So these are arguments. So argument is considered and based on three parts. One is premise, or premises, plural. So premises are basically the reasons of evidence cited. So I talked about the grass is green. So why is grass green? So we talked about the premise of being the photosynthesis. So we can say because of photosynthesis. So grass is green because we can have one premise, two premise, three premise, etc. So what is the conclusion here? Grass is green. So this is the basic conclusion. This is the premise. And now we also have the between of this, a logical relation. So a logical relation actually combines premises, LR, to give us the conclusion. So that's all you need to know about arguments in a very detailed and simple fashion. So what is logic? So this course will teach you the fundamentals of formal logic and show you how logical thinking and logical concepts were applied to design and build digital systems. So by gaining skills in logical analysis, you will not only gain important life skills, but you will understand how computers work and how to make you a better technician in the long run. So as we'll see later, logic is a science which actually sets forth a properly ordered thinking, while critical thinking mainly is an application of these rules. So many introductory students tend to think that logic is imposed on human thinking. It's better to think that logic as something, as philosophers and mathematicians have discovered about human thinking. So logic rules like the laws of nature, or they were formed about years of observation and how it actually worked before they actually conceived those laws. So let's talk about the wheres and whys of logic and critical thinking. So although nobody has actually discovered a handy full formula that sums it all up, many individuals down to the centuries have deeply thought about thinking. As the Stanford standards and criteria have been proposed, tested, and found out to be reliable guides to sound judgment and the attainment of truth. So, or correspondence with the reality of case. So for example, such a criterion, consider statistical thinking. To learn more about large population of things, we consider statistical sample in which we have a relation between a few samples. So these are randomly selected samples, so they can be randomly selected and we will get a discrete different value. Thus, critical thinking is more than just criterial thinking. Rather, it is a thinking on the basis of criteria that have been tested, to be found, and to be reliable guides to sound judgment and the attainment of truth, no matter what consideration it is. So sometimes who makes very important decisions on the basis of critical thinking is known as the person's criterion. So at least the critical thinkers they use today are more general, use the reliable truth and for the attainment of sound judgment. So we also talk about plenty of other stuff. While in these lessons, you're going to be learning a lot of stuff, we're going to focus on logical and critical thinking to the most. So I'll see you there. Okay guys, now let's take a look into prepositions. So prepositions are basically premises and conclusions. Well, the thing about prepositions is that they can either be true or they can either be false. So according to definition, prepositions can be the statement which actually explains the premises or conclusions which are actually deemed true or false, depending on what they actually state and what they actually find in the truth value. So that's a quick definition and quick intro to prepositions. Let's keep moving. So guys, I really want to talk about an important argument segment here and how we actually test the validity for an argument once we actually make a decision. Well, let's take a look into this. So let's have arguments 1, arg2, and arg3. So this is the premise. We have the conclusion. Now let's say this. If this is true, and this is true, and this is true, then what is the conclusion? Is it true? Well, there's a high chance it would be true, but how do we test for validity? Well, the validity can be tested by actually making sure that we find, if we answer true, then we may say it is true, but what if there's a false statement? What if there is a counterexample that is actually proving all these statements wrong? What if we forgot about an edge case called arg4, which actually states false? Well, to provide this and actually prove the validity, we should make sure that we have looked in most of the counterexamples and count cases to make sure we have a true statement. So that's how we actually validate arguments. So I just want to say about sound arguments. Okay, sound arguments basically mean that sound basically says it considers all the test cases or all the covering test cases. So let's say if arg1 has all x and y, and arg2 has all y and z, there would be a conclusion from a premise stating that all x and z. So why is this sound? Because we used all. What does all consist? All. That is basically literally all. It considers all the test cases. So that's why we can say this is a sound statement and how we can say this is a sound argument. That's it, guys. Let's take a look into deductive fallacies. So let's say P implies Q. For example, P can be a premise of if I run, I may lose weight. And we can say Q being I ran, so I lost weight. Even if we remove I ran or I may lose, we get if I run, I lose weight. So running basically implies that I lose weight. So that's basically a deductive fallacy in this case. That's how we actually say that's a true deductive fallacy. So what makes a deductive fallacy into a formal fallacy? Into a formal fallacy? Well, let's take a look. If P implies Q, then it's true. Then we also have to test for P, and it actually goes to Q to make sure that each element works. We have to check argument of P and Q. So that's a deductive fallacy. For formal fallacy, something's changed. We have to check out the negation of P also implies the negation of Q. To make sure that we have all the counter arguments, we have to consider the reverse, the contradiction in this case. Let's take a look into hypothetical syllogism. Hypothetical syllogism. This is one of my favorite and one of the stuff which I actually enjoy. So if P implies Q and Q implies R, then P implies R. Simple as that. There's nothing more confusing than this. So if we say that if A likes B and B likes C, then it's obvious that A likes C. So it may not be that much because there's always a chance for denying it, but it may. So it may. So we must say it may. It's a hypothesis. That's what we say, hypothesis. Now let's take a look at the disjunctive syllogism. So if we have P or Q, this P or Q, then we can also say it's not in the case of P and negation P, then we can imply Q. That's a disjunctive syllogism. So let's take a look at the strong argument. This is inductive. We can have the weak argument same as the strong, but this is just inductive as well. So in the strong, just remember, if anything, which is all, stating all, that is universal, or it's stating a fixed set of cases, or conclusion is true in all cases, then we have a strong argument. For the weak, it would be the opposite. It may or may not. It would be for a sample. We can say for a sample as well here. Instead of all, we can say a sample. Instead of fixed set of cases, sample cases. So that's a weak and that's a strong set. So what would be a cogent set? So a strong inductive argument with true premises is called a cogent set. So a strong inductive argument with true premises. So if all the premises are true, that would be a cogent set. And like with deductive arguments, determining cogency is a two-step process. First, determine the strength of the argument, whether it's weak or strong, and go through the weak argument and make sure it's always as uncogent. So weak arguments are always uncogent. And if you determine the argument is weak, you don't need to even go any further. So that's basically it. So guys, we talked a few of the model modifiers. Let's take a look at the remaining two. We talked about all, we talked about some, we talked about if. So let's take a look at the other two, such as necessary and impossible. Necessary means that it must happen, it must. It can also be said as must, and it's obviously labeled as true in most cases. Impossible means it's not possible. It's definitely not possible. It must be false. So this is all cases. This is a sample. This is a case, for example. Case true or false. We have, let's say, what do we have? Possibly. More, we have 80% chance, I don't want to specify numbers, a more false chance than true. We have probably, there would be a more true chance than false. So there are a few model modifiers in this case. Let's take a look at categorical logic. That it means just classification. Like if we have an animal here, is it a carnivore, or is it an omnivore, or is it a herbivore? So this is basic classification. So in this case, how do we actually classify? What's the logic behind this? Well, it's all in the model modifiers. All, some. That's all you need to know, guys. If we say all these animals eat only vegetables, or all the animal eats is only vegetables, what does that mean? It's a herbivore. If we say this animal sometimes eats meat, it sometimes eats vegetables, what does that mean? It's an omnivore. So it all depends on how we actually take a look at the statement here. So that's what you should understand.
Hey guys, I hope you learned something out of this video. If you like the videos and if you want to watch more, want to learn about a specific topic, leave it in the comments below. If not, just give it a likes up and subscribe.